I couldn't help but notice that you've clicked on and are presently listening to an episode of the Paranormal Patio podcast. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your support. And if you want to continue to support us, the best thing you can do is share our episodes on social media. That's right. You can tag us in everything. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find us on paranormalpatio.com, where you'll find articles, links to information from our past guests, as well as, every episode as it comes out. Also, head on over to Patreon. Patreon.com/beyondthepatio. You can get a monthly live stream, at least one. Sometimes we do more. Exclusive bonus content, early access to all of our episodes. And starting with season 3, I've got to move season 1 to the archives. So they'll be on Patreon as well, and you can listen to them there. Thanks again for your support. And hey, let's get into the episode. What kind of weird thing are we talking about today? In this episode, fortean researcher, investigator, and fellow podcaster Ashley Hilt, you might know her as Ashers on the social medias, is here in the patio, and we're going to be having a wonderful conversation, actually, about a lot of different things. Mothman, aliens, Bigfoot, more Mothman, and Dogman, Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky. Because this show, it's all about Kentucky, apparently. But I love that. I love when that happens. And you'll get to hear that towards the end of the episode when we make a little connection to Western Kentucky. Make sure you follow Ashers on all the social media and stay up to date with her podcast. On Wednesdays, we talk weird. It's great. It's a good show. It's fun. It's a little bit more rambunctious than my show. And you know what? That's great. It's fine. It's totally fine. So if you like to turn the volume up a little bit, head over and check out some On Wednesdays We Talk Weird. Also, there was a torrential rain during this interview, so my audio is going to sound a little bit echoey, but I was able to get rid of most of the rain sound. How? I do not know. So, if you like mystery, there's one for you. Let's get into the conversation.
You're listening to the Paranormal Patio Podcast.
Welcome back to Paranormal Patio. As always, it's me, Jason, right here tonight in the patio with Ashley Hilt. It's Ashers. Ashers, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to have you on the show. I have been a fan of your podcast for a little while. I think I found it last year on the Indrid Cold episode, I think was the first one that I listened to. So I am definitely excited to talk to you, and we can talk about, I have some insider information that you're working on some sort of a Mothman documentary. Maybe we can get into that. Before we dive too deep, if you could fill my listeners in on who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I've gotten pretty good at this. So my name's Ashley Hilt, or Ashers on the internet. I'm a full-time fortean investigator. And then I also have a weekly podcast called On Wednesdays We Talk Weird, where sometimes I talk about what I'm investigating. Most of the time we just pick a topic and run with it. But I do, I'm an investigator first and a podcaster second. And then I do pretty much everything else. Like you said, which we'll talk about more. I'm working on a documentary about the Mothman called Sinking the Mothman. And there's also, which apparently a lot of people don't know about this one because I'm terrible at marketing myself. There's a book that's going along with the documentary with all of the Mothman research in it. So that will be out. Both should be fall 2022.
I didn't know about the book. You are very bad at marketing that.
I'm terrible. Yeah, the worst. I'm my own worst enemy here.
Before we start talking about super weird things, I saw that you were recently in Erie, PA, and I almost moved to Erie, PA back in my 20s because it is the setting for my favorite movie of all time.
Oh?
That Thing You Do. Tom Hanks' first written and directed movie. It's my favorite movie of all time.
I had no idea. Yeah, I was there. I was there for the High Strangeness Erie event. I was the master of ceremonies. I got to do live interviews. This couple that I know, they go by they're artist couples. They go by Eerie Eric and Creepy Carrie. Great people. They had heard me do the podcast on. It's titled "Have Your Cake and Kill It Too." It was actually with my friend Sam, who dated a serial killer. It was the first time that I had ever really put out one of these kind of witness interviews that I did. Now, this one was different because it was true crime, but I'd never really made it public, kind of what the process looked like when you're talking to people that experience, either high strangeness or I guess crime in their life. I thought it would be really cool to have me kind of do like a talk show style deal where people would come up and the audience would get to see kind of what that looks like when you're conducting interviews with these people. Very intimate setting, but it went really well. It was lots of fun. And then we went to the Beach 6 landing site where the infamous Presque Isle incident happened, where there was a UFO and Bigfoot encounter at the same time. We did some other things. It was great. Erie was great. I can't wait to go back when it's not a tundra like it was over the weekend.
Yeah, I bet. I've got this like built up version of it in my head though, right? That it's going to be like the movie, that thing you do, but I know it's not because it wasn't filmed there. It just takes place there. So I'm going to be really disappointed whenever I make it there, but I'm sure that there will be other charms that I will have overlooked, in preparing for the trip.
It was my first time there. It was great. I was telling, I had my research partner with me and she's not in the public eye, but I was telling her, I was like, man, I'd move here if it wasn't for the weather. But the lake's great. It was okay. Like I said, I can't wait to go back.
It's on my list. It's not high on my list because, like I said, realistically, it's not going to be anything I expect. But, if I ever win the lottery, I'm going to show up there one day and just buy a house, And
just change your name to Tom Hanks and, do that thing that you do.
Tom Hanks isn't even my favorite, his character isn't even my favorite character, Mr. White. I have a favorite character too. It's so bad. So Ethan Embry plays a mostly untitled character. His name in the credits is TB Player for the bass player. That character is my favorite character in the movie. And Ethan Embry is one of my favorite actors of all time. I love him.
Oh, he's great. Yeah, he's a good actor.
His Twitter is fire too.
Is it?
Yeah, for sure. He's definitely, politically, he talks about a lot of that stuff, which I agree with and I identify with. So it was really refreshing whenever I found him on Twitter that he's talking about stuff we could totally be friends. Absolutely. I could be friends with TB Player and, my life would just soar from that point on. But
I'm going to harass him into being friends with you. I'm going to start a whole.
Oh my God, that would be so awesome.
Yeah. Just keep bothering him. Like, hey, have you met this dude? You guys know each other?
That would be so amazing if you did that. I like anything you want. Just, hit me up. I will get it to you. No limit.
We'll make it happen. We make dreams happen. That's what we do.
Anyway, let's get a little bit weird. What brought you into investigating and researching into all this high strangeness stuff?
Jesus, that's a question right there. So I've always been into cryptozoology and, it started with, of course, the classic Patterson Gimlin film. Seeing Patty do that walk and that little turn back really sold me. I was like, that is 100% real. Anybody that thinks otherwise is ridiculous. Now, of course, I was 10 at the time, so I didn't know anything about science. I didn't know how real it really was. And so I started getting older. And as a teenager, it was my dream. I was going to go to school for zoology and go buy a house on Lake Okanagan and search for Ogopogo, and then in the meantime, work at a zoo. And, that was my thing. That didn't happen. Life got weird and, life got life. And so I didn't go to school for zoology. As a matter of fact, I did go to school, but I kept flip-flopping my major. So I started off in astrophysics, and then eventually I threw that in as my minor and started majoring in criminal psychology. Then I was like, and I still didn't know what I was going to do. Then I dropped out. So there was that. And then I went on to pursue a job with a big retail company and marketing, actually. So I just all over the place. I'd been all over the place. So then in 2019, one of my friends had asked me to go with them to the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I said yes. And we went there. Well, she was friends with this YouTuber at the time, and he wanted to make a little mini documentary about it. I never believed in the Mothman. I'm I'm very scientifically based. I'm like, if it, that it was a sandhill crane or an owl or something, or people just lying. I just didn't buy the woo. I'm like, this is no. So we go, and I was very humbled that weekend because I experienced a string of synchronicities, which I get into a little bit more in the Mothman documentary. And at which point in time, I decided I gotta tell the world about this. And so it's been love at first fright, I guess you can say. And that's where it started. Then I was laid off from my job in 2020, my marketing job in 2020. Again, as someone that is very skeptical in the field and very scientifically driven, there's nothing in this world that can't convince me that wasn't divinely guided and that wasn't the push that I needed to just do this full time. And I hit the ground running. I've been doing it ever since.
That's terrific. I can only imagine what was going through your advisor's head in college when you're like, yeah, this is what I'm going to start taking classes in.
They were like, that's going to be expensive because you pretty much got to start all over. I'm like, that's fine.
What a combination too,
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah,
fun and eclectic. And, we do things like this when we're in our formative years.
I was young, and my husband was taking astrophysics, and so we had started taking it together, and so that was kind of the thing that we were going to do. He was taking astrophysics and astronomy, and I was going to focus on physics and astrophysics. And then I don't know, I just I've always been into true crime stuff too. Like that's always been one of my big things. I've seen some things in my lifetime, and I just was like, you know what? It's going to be a lot less school. If I got into criminal psychology, it was a lot less. I had already started kind of looking through the court systems of like being an advocate for certain things. So it just seemed like it made more sense. And then I became a mother and decided to just not do any of it. So here I am.
Here we are. And because of all of that, you're doing something now that you have a lot of passion for. It may not be astrophysics, but that could come into it sometimes.
Well,
I'm sure
it does. I'll tell you, most of my research is based off of physics. And so it's amazing to me. And that's kind of part of it as well, is that, my life, just the way it all went, has led me to what I do right now, because there's a lot to it. Like I said, a lot of my research is based on physics and these theories and these concepts. And then on top of that, with my criminal psychology has really helped, and just my interrogation tactics and, being able to kind of tell bullshit from real stories, and, being able to do investigative work. I mean, it's amazing how much it all held hands together to get me here. And that's what I mean. It's not like this was no accident for me to be where I am now.
Yeah. You mentioned that you didn't buy into the woo of the Mothman. And I'm curious to know if we have to wait for the documentary to come out, or if we can get your hot take on how you feel about it now.
No, I can share that. Enough people want to talk to me about it. Now I do believe in the Mothman. Of course, like I said, I did not. I thought that it was wild because it didn't fit biologically anywhere, and even when I had first started with the synchronicities, I still didn't really believe it right away until I sat down with, we did an interview for the documentary with somebody that worked at the university in biology and things like that. And they really went over the numbers with us and what it would take for something that was human sized and shaped in order to be able to fly. And, you're talking a 30 to 40 foot wingspan in order to carry a human. And that's why we don't have wings, even mechanical ones, because they're massive and inconvenient. Mothman's wings aren't like that. They're like 10 to 12 feet, if that, more probably 8 to 12. But, nowadays, after I have sat down and spoken with people about their experiences with this thing, kind of seen exactly how personal it is, it all really started kind of hitting home. And then it didn't really dawn on me until somebody had relayed a sighting that they had back in, this was 2021. When they had relayed their experience, it had brought back a memory that I had back in 2016. And I actually saw this thing also and didn't make that connection until after the fact.
How does that work?
Because I just was in denial about it. Okay, so again, I've approached this with a very scientific scope, and prior to my current life, when things didn't make sense scientifically, I would just kind of shove it and be like, it didn't happen. But there's a caveat to it. So back in 2016, I was at a friend's house. We were doing adult activities, and we decided to make some adult brownies and eat them. So after the night had ended, after we had all the fun stuff and did everything or whatever, we were going to bed, and she was in her room and I was in her living room on the couch. All of a sudden I just started feeling very uneasy, very uncomfortable, very scared. I mean, dreadful, really. This TV cabinet that's standing up, and there's about a foot of space between the cabinet and the ceiling. All of a sudden, this like black mass starts forming in the center in the center of it. And it just kind of starts growing out into the room. And while this thing is forming, it's starting to become very human shaped. And then, it looked like arms were coming out and like looming over the room. Except while they're coming out, they're also growing downwards, and they're wings. So I get up and I calmly walk to her room, and I just told her, listen, I'm freaking out. I need you to wake up. She just kind of laughed. She's like, you're high. It's fine. Stays up with me for a while. And then we just never talked about it ever again. And I never thought about it ever again until, like I said, someone had come to me. They said they were in Atlanta, Georgia. They were nervous about talking to me because a piece of their story was that they had just eaten edibles and they'd seen the Mothman outside of their hotel room. And I was like, well, marijuana doesn't do that to people. And it doesn't, I've done it a lot. I've done it enough in my life to know that I'm not going to hallucinate on it. I've had edibles before and that had never happened. And so when that kind of happened, I was like, wow, that was the Mothman. And it makes sense because it's a very personal experience that people have, and it's very life altering. And just with the timeline of my life and kind of how this all took place, that's really when it started.
That's fascinating. There's definitely a large chunk of stories that start out with some sort of, I don't want to just say drug, but some sort of altered state, Yeah. And when you get into purposefully putting your mind into an altered state, whether it be via drugs or meditation or breath work or, any manner of doing it, you seem to open up these doors or these windows into reality, that there are things out there that don't make sense, that you can't explain scientifically. But that doesn't make them less real, especially when you're the one experiencing them. And it doesn't mean that you can't get something out of it, some sort of a message, or a sign, or even just the experience itself. And that could lead to, who knows how far down the rabbit hole you'll go when you encounter Donnie Darko's bunny rabbit.
Right. Well, I mean, we started, I'll tell you, it's not happening yet, but down the line, there will be a documentary on DMT and the machine elves associated with DMT. And that one was kind of an accident just because I had a great young adulthood, and I have lots of really cool friends that did really cool adult things. And I've never done DMT. But, I've heard their stories. And like, what's crazy is that the two friends that I know, they did DMT and went to this place with these beings. And what was wild was that the one guy was talking to snake-like people, and the other guy was talking to like goblin-like people, like gnomes kind of. But what was weird was that the guy talking to the snakes could see the guy talking to the gnomes, and the guy talking to the gnomes could see the guy talking to the snakes. Wherever it was they were at, they were in the same place at the same time. And so when I wanted to kind of look into that, because who knows, they could just be embellishing the story. Maybe they told each other about it beforehand and forgot that they did. I don't know. But this actually happens a lot with people that are on DMT. They end up being able to describe the other person's experience, not just theirs, but the other person. And so I really want to do one eventually down the line where we get where we can get some medical assistance and hook people up to some machines and see if there's a way for us to induce that kind of state of mind without the DMT, or what happens in the brain when you do, take that journey and really deep dive into it. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I've played with the idea.
No, but it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Whenever you do something to your own body, you put a specific chemical into your body that changes your mental consciousness, and you find yourself somewhere else beyond your physical existence, but someone else is there that can recount the story from their point of view and their perspective, and it's the same story. That's wild. Yeah. Absolutely wild.
Yeah. Yeah, it blew my mind. I was like, "Are you?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like, "You guys just told each other about it." And they're like, "No." He said it started because the one friend told him, "Hey, I saw you in there talking to these snake things," and he was like, "Wait, I saw you talking to these gnome things. And they were just both like blown away by it. And I mean, I have no reason to believe these guys, you know what I mean? They're my friends. And so, I mean, I would love to experiment with that more and see if we can replicate that with complete strangers that have nothing to gain from it in a scientific setting, because I do believe there's a science to all this. It's just we don't have it yet.
The thing about DMT that's interesting is that we naturally produce it in ourselves, right? So it makes me wonder about these contactee experiences or abductions or, you know, anything that's considered the woo-woo. Is that just for some reason your body just kicked in a high dose of DMT out of nowhere and boom, you're on Venus talking to, you know, the beautiful naked goddesses of Venus and all that? Like,
yeah, I mean, it very well could be. Well, you know, one thing that I also play with, and again, I think that these things all hold hands together. It's just about finding the keys, is that when you talk to people that have had encounters, and I'm sure that you probably have people listening to the show that have seen something, right? They've lived in a haunted house, or they saw a UFO, or, you know, who knows? Maybe they even, you know, petted a Bigfoot. I don't know. And when I say this, their face is going to light up if they've never heard it before. What you'll find with people that experience high strangeness also tend to experience some degree of trauma in their life. You know, I don't know if it's because they were already predisposed to these high strange events, or if it's possible that they have this trauma happen and then the trauma changes the way that their brain operates, because trauma does. It's scarring to the brain. You know, it changes your chemical imbalances and all. It makes your brain go crazy. So, you know, is it because that then our brains are altered, you know, from maybe a young age? Because normally it's childhood trauma at that. It's not usually, I mean, I do have some adults with adult trauma, but it typically happens in early age. You know, some of these people don't even find out about that until after they've experienced these high strangeness events. So you were talking about how, you know, there's DMT that we make naturally in our brains. So are those chemicals that are caused by trauma? Is that what's causing this? You know, I don't know. It's going to take a lot of research and a lot of money in a lab somewhere to find that out. But I'm determined. You know, I think I can.
I believe in you. No,
Thank
for
you.
real. It's an interesting take, and it's not something that I've really thought about too deeply, but I don't disagree with it on the surface, because when I was 12, and I've talked about this in a recent episode, I don't remember the episode number. It was with AJ Lund. Check that out. We both have suffered brain trauma. When I was 12, I was hit by a car. Although I came out of it mostly unscathed, it has deeply affected my short-term memory. And from recovery until my adult life, I mean, we're talking over 2 decades now, I've been dealing with short-term memory problems. And I never experienced anything in the high strangeness category until a couple of years after that is when it started to manifest in my life with, you know, different things. And so thinking about that now with what I've said and what you've said, it's like, well, maybe that is something to look into, because your brain just reroutes everything and makes use of what it has, right, to function. And so, you know,
it's amazing. I mean, you know, some people, when I talk to them the first time, because I catalog everything that I get, doesn't matter what it is, because I try to focus on patterns. We map these instances out and we take a look at that map, because there's also, I do believe in the concept of window areas and things like that as well. I think there's something to it. But, you know, so I'll take all of these instances, and for the most part, my eyewitnesses, I try to befriend them for a couple of reasons. It's easier to catch somebody in a lie when you get to know them. And so I'll have them relay their story to me multiple times. So I can get multiple times out of it. I'll have them talk about it. I'll have them talk about normal everyday life things to try to catch them in a white lie so I can see what they look like when they're lying to me. Again, that's the interrogation side of it. Right. Yeah. And so, you know, that's kind of how you pick apart. Because let's be honest, probably about 60% of the stories that you hear out there are probably a lie. They're probably not real. And then you got a good 30% that are misidentification. I mean, it happens. But the people that I do believe have real, legitimate experiences in high strangeness, you know, eventually you get to know them. And at first, you don't ask them, have you experienced, you don't have to answer this, but have you experienced any type of trauma? And no, sometimes they'll be like, no. And then the more I talk to them and the more we kind of become friends, then it starts coming out, then they start being like, well, when I was young, my parents divorced, something simple like that, even my parents divorced, or it could be something deep and dark. I am a severe child of trauma. I was a 2-time sex trafficking victim and, survivor now, and amongst other things. And so it makes sense that I then went on to have these experiences in my life because it tracks with the science of it. I believe that there's a tie there, and I have yet to find anybody that has legitimately stayed solid on their story, said that they saw something, they experienced something, and they just grew up with a regular everyday childhood and nothing weird happened to them ever.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to be thinking about this deeply now because there's so many stories that are like moderately famous that you can look into with this, and especially more recent people, you can see like, well, have they ever had some sort of trauma in their life that caused this? It's really interesting. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure,
You've opened a new door for me. I've been operating on this idea that, again, like you mentioned, all these things are holding hands, right? That
sure.
The Fae and UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts and all this stuff. I've been on that team for a while. I was looking more at environmental influence in these window areas combined with brain chemistry, mood, all of this stuff. And so now also taking into account trauma, that just broadens the search, I guess.
Absolutely.
More to look at.
And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's always that, because I'm not, again, I sound nuts, but I believe very much in a science of this, and I still believe in flesh and blood creatures. I believe that there is an undiscovered species of ape out there. And obviously you can be somebody that hasn't experienced trauma, that doesn't go on to then continue to have a life of high strangeness and see Bigfoot. But I believe that if you see Bigfoot and he disappears behind a tree, there's probably some trauma there too. And this isn't, maybe it's the first, but it's definitely not going to be the last. Again, these people continue to have instances of high strangeness. And then so you think, well, okay, but they have trauma. Maybe they're mentally ill, but they're not always. I mean, they're not. And, again, that's scientifically proven. We know that these people usually go through treatment and therapy and things like that. They're not. They don't have mental issues that are to the point of where they can't cognitively, know what's going on. They're not schizophrenic. They're not hallucinating. And then like in your case, there's physical head trauma is also a part of it as well. So, I mean, it's very real. I mean, I'm not going to say that this is what I'm sticking with for sure. It's just a trend that I have noticed. That's one thing I'll disclose up front. Anything that I say here, I want people to make up their own minds on stuff. I want you guys to research and listen to more people than just me. I want you to listen to people that have opposing views to mine, because I want my mind changed. I'm just here for the truth, but I can't tell you what to think or feel, just patterns that I've noticed and all this research that I've done. Yeah, for sure. So I have to ask, outside of the brownie Mothman that you witnessed in your friend's house, have you experienced any other high strangeness personally? Oh yeah. Mostly UFO sightings those are huge for me. I have several. I mean, I've got a lot, and I need to post them online. I just haven't. I want to be able to edit these things and make sure before I put them out and go, this is a UFO. Gosh, I mean, I've seen probably well over 10 UFOs. I probably have 5 of them recorded, photographed, things like that. Synchronicity is something huge in my life. And even though I can't share that so much with people, because synchronicity is like, when you describe it to another person, it's like describing a dream. They don't really get it unless it's, unless they're there. But, I consider that high strangeness. Me and my daughter, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and last year we saw a thunder crow in our neighborhood. And that was pretty wild. It was it was a crow. And then all of a sudden it tried to land on one of the electrical poles, and, they're like T-shaped or whatever. And I had noticed when it went down to land, the wingspan on it was double the size of the horizontal post on there. Crows are not that big. So, I mean, it wasn't like massive. I mean, those posts are probably 8 feet, they're probably 8 feet wide. But an 8-foot wingspan on a crow is unheard of. So, I mean, we've definitely had other things, haunted places, my home, I think is haunted, or something's going on. I don't believe in ghosts the traditional way people do. I don't think they're dead people. But we've had some things happen in my home. The show all the time, the Wednesday show, people catch UVPs on it all the time. And we just let the fans run with it. So yeah, it continues to happen. And I genuinely believe that one of these days, I will see the Mothman again.
I hope you do. Absolutely.
I do too. I'm so excited.
Sure. You mentioned, the thunder crow. That's a terminology I'm not familiar with. I'm big on thunderbirds in general. I got to interview Stan Gordon around Halloween last year, and we talked about thunderbirds a little bit. It's always been a fascinating point of interest for me because there's a little town that's nearby me, if you want to even call it a town. It sits on this big bluff along a river, and on the side of this big bluff is a really old thunderbird pictograph, right?
Yeah.
That's been from however many hundreds of years ago. And so I grew up knowing that was within an hour of me, closer to 40 minutes probably. One of the first things I got into after the Mothman, which was my first paranormal interest for whatever strange reason, was thunderbirds. And so I've always kind of focused more on those stories when I come across them, just because it's, personal interest, right?
Sure.
But I have not heard anyone say thunder crow before.
Oh yeah. Thunder crows are they're not a big thing. Dude, that's the thing. They're not 30-foot wingspan, big giant, condor birds. They're just really large crows. There's a guy, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. Oh my gosh, there's a researcher. I'll get his name. He's writing a book right now on thunder crows. And I think that's really neat because it is a phenomenon that's happening. People see these giant crows and nobody's really talking about it because they're not super massive. I feel like that's the part of cryptozoology a lot of people leave out is there's a lot of really seemingly mundane things that people it's just not sexy. So they don't really include it, and thunder crows, I feel like are one of them. But yeah, we tried to, I saw it on this busy road and, in my hometown and my daughter, before anything happened, I asked her, she was 9 at the time. I said, what is that? What is that? She said, it's crow, so then I was like, do I chase it? Now, I was on the way to take my daughter. She had surgery to remove an ingrown toenail or something mundane. And I was on the way to take her for her follow-up. And I'm kind of do I turn the car around and tell him I was chasing a giant crow? I don't know. But by the time I kind of had the clarity enough to turn the car around, it was gone and it had left. I went and I researched how big those poles were. I wanted to know what that wingspan was like. I did. I found out they were 4 foot across. And then, like I said, it was about double the size of that. So, and it couldn't land on the pole. It couldn't. I don't know if it was because it was too big. I don't know what happened. It just flew off. And, I've asked people in the neighborhood, because this is less than a mile away from my home. Have you seen anything weird, strange? But my home where I live, it's right on a trail. And so, it's not, I live in a suburb, so it's very largely populated. But it's not hard for something to get from, the populated areas to the non. That's just Ohio. That's just the Midwest. You know how it is. You're in a big city and then you're not, So, I don't know. I don't know if other people have reports in the area and they just haven't come forward. But nobody claimed to have seen it that day. But there were other people on the road that day. So I know they saw it. But then again, I just thought it was a regular crow until it tried to land.
I'm going to look into that one too. Man, you're giving me a whole list. Whenever I'm editing this, I'm just going to start writing. They're going to find me days later with just notebook pages everywhere.
I'll find that author for you too on the book. I'll figure that out.
Yeah, that'd be great. I would love to be able to read that for sure. Going back to your mention of UFOs, what's the closest that you feel like you've been to a UFO?
Oh gosh. So this is a two-parter. It's a good story.
All
right. So the first time, I'm actually terrified of aliens. Most of what I do, I categorize. If I had to pick, I say I'm fortean because I do all of it. Not a lot of people are familiar with that term, but it just means that I do all of it. Mostly, I'm into ufology. And like I said, I'm terrified of aliens. I think that they're scary. I want to meet them, but I also kind of don't want to meet them. So there's that. So anyway, so when I was 18, I was outside and it was probably 2:00 in the morning. Now, again, I live in Dayton, Ohio, which is where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is. It's actually one of the places that I actively investigate now, but not at the time. I was outside at 2 a.m. and all of a sudden I see this, it looked just like headlights come over the tree line. And it looked huge, but I couldn't tell because it was dark. But how the lights were spaced out, like you could tell that they were part of one craft, just the way that they were moving. And it just looked like headlights approaching. I thought it was so weird. And I was scared. So I went inside immediately. But then I was thinking about it for a couple of days and, I couldn't see the shape of it. I can't even begin to guess what the shape might have been because I could only see the lights. They were so bright and they were just white, big white lights. So a couple of days later, I get on the internet and, at the time, again, I was always into cryptozoology. I woke up every day and checked the Cryptomundo website. This was probably back in 2009 when this happened. But I found another website that would, people would share their UFO sightings all over the world or whatever. Don't know what it was called. But I had found a couple of things. I had actually found other people reported a very similar craft in the same area. So other people had seen it at the same time. There was 2 other reports. And then I also saw somebody, which it's really, really scared me, a guy who had typed up, and it was like a super old forum. It looked like it was just a terrible design, but he had typed up that he needed help because he was stuck in his home, had been stuck in his home for about the past 3 days with these creatures outside of his house trying to get in. It's very reminiscent of like the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. I don't know whatever happened. I just know that was like nightmare fuel for me. I was like, oh, okay, this is exactly what I don't want to happen. So I'm just going to not, I was like, I'm going to just, don't ask, don't tell. We don't talk about it. It doesn't exist. It's gone. So then a couple of years later, probably about 2 years later, I was on Craigslist because that's a good idea always. I'm just going through the general ads and just, because I like reading the shit show. I don't know. And, but there was a guy on there. He said, hey, I'm a film student up here at Wright State University, and I'm making a film about people that have had UFO encounters. If you had one, get a hold of me. So I did. I got a hold of him and, I met him in a coffee shop. I can't remember anything about the guy. He was just very plain, very nondescript. Some guy that I went and talked to, shared that exact story with, never talked to again. But a couple years after that, probably about 3 years after that, I found myself on Craigslist again because I don't learn from my mistakes. And the exact same call out for people was on there. Hey, I'm a film student at Wright State University. I'm making a documentary on people's UFO encounters. Tell me your story. And I thought that was very, very odd. So I don't know. I've tried to now look in to see where this film might have ended up at. I haven't pushed it too hard, though. I could probably contact the school and figure out where they keep those films and whatnot. But, just the fact that it was, I swear it was word for word the exact same post was really weird. So I don't know. Was it a Men in Black? Makes sense to me. They would just be regular old college students looking like guys now. But I don't know. It's a very, very weird story.
It is a weird story. I like it though. That's that's one of those things that I've noticed with UFOs is that a lot of people seem to have, like, they don't forget it, but it doesn't take up a lot of residence in their mind. So right. The UFOs I have seen, I don't think about until I start talking about weird stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I saw these UFOs. The reason I ask about how close you feel like you've been to one was the closest I've been was within a mile. It was really low and it was going over a street. And this thing was enormous. This giant red light. It was actually on my way to work. It was nighttime. I drove past work to try to get closer to it. But then whenever I got there, it was just gone. And I didn't see it anywhere else. It was just humongous. It had to be the size of like a locomotive. And it was just going maybe 30 feet above the road, really slow from the south to the north. And then it was gone. It was so close. And then I told everybody at work, because I'm the resident weirdo, within days, gone. I was talking to Kyle Cadell for an episode in season 2, and we were talking about his UFO experiences. And I was like, I saw one just, however many months ago or whatever. And so, yeah, do you have that? Do you have that where you don't think about the things that you see?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. It gets to the point to where it happens so often anyway that, again, you're like, oh, how many have you seen? Oh, I've seen tons, Even like when I think about like my most recent, I had almost two back-to-back sightings that I was able to, the one I was able to record and the second one I was not. So the one I was able to record, which like I said, I need to just put it out there. It looks like to the naked eye, to me, it was like lights spinning So it was like something circular. It was tilted at an angle and it was moving very fast. And then it just disappeared. Now in the recording, you can absolutely see that it's something circular tilted, but it kind of looks, instead of spinning, it kind of looks more like the lights are going back and forth, but it's spinning. And that one I have on video, and I tried to chase it. I tried to go find where it was. But I could never find it again. Then the other one, I'm just sitting at home. I'm literally sitting on my couch and it's middle of the day and I look outside. I see something silver and I'm like, whoa, what is that? I'm talking on the phone to somebody. I'm like, hey, I gotta go. And I get up and I rush outside and I'm trying to take a video of it. And I can hardly even make out what it is. I'm like, what is the shape of this? Because it's kind of like flashing. It was so weird. It's like there and then it's not and then it's there. There was not a single cloud in the sky. So I'm trying to take a video and it's not showing up at all. And it's very, very high up. So I'm like, I don't know if it's just that or I don't know. So I started trying to take pictures of it and I was able to get some very bad pictures of it. And you know, you can kind of make out some weird blob, but in every single picture, because I'm just taking picture after picture after picture, and every one it's shaped differently. Some of them, it looks like there's a shine coming off of it. So I believe now it's not so much that it was changing shape. It's not so much that it was coming in and out of reality. It's just that it had some type of camouflage on it. And that camouflage was some type of silver. So when the sun hit it the right way, you couldn't see it. And I think that it was playing off of the sun and what it was. Now, you know, today with drones being a thing that just everybody can have, and sometimes they can look weird if you've never seen a drone at night. You know, you got to wonder, is this just something new that somebody's made that I just haven't seen yet? And which I guess is why I don't like to put my stuff out there, because I don't want people to be like, oh, you know, she's just putting that out there and it's just, you look dumb, I guess. And, you know, that's another thing. When I ended up telling my Mothman story eventually, it was after I'd already been doing all this. You know, I kind of broke the story on my own show. You know, it's hard to talk about because it's like, well, she's making a Mothman documentary. Of course, she's going to say that she saw the Mothman. Of course, she's going to say she sees UFOs, you know, but the thing is that it's my job to literally look for these things. And I don't think that the average everyday person is looking for them, you know, and so it is going to be people like us that does produce that stuff because we look up a lot more than normal people do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, I have been very good in my adult years of learning how to, for the most part, just not care what people think about me.
Yeah,
you know, it's a hard thing to finally start, but it's like a snowball. I tell my personal stories all the time. I don't care if people believe me or not, because someone does. And someone is going to be like, you know, I saw something like that and I thought I was crazy. And now I don't think I'm crazy. You know, so if you can help somebody at the expense of someone calling you an idiot or a liar, that's fine. If you're able to change somebody's mental state, their emotional state, because they can relate to something that you have to say, it's worth it, you know, so I don't worry about it.
I think that's a great pep talk because, yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, it's not like I make any money off of this. I don't, you know, I don't like gaining anything from it. You know, just kind of sharing what's out there and what I experience. And, you know, again, I don't want anybody to think the way that I think or, you know, I like having opposing views to people because that's how you learn. Because if any one of us in any of these fields had any of it 100% right, then the rest of us would be out of a job. And so, I mean, we don't have it all together yet. But no, I mean, you're right. I think that it is just something that I have to, because I can't explain it with science. It makes me uncomfortable. It's a reflection of me and how I feel about it. You know, I'll tell you, the most believable stories that I hear people say, they all say the same thing before they tell it. And they always say something like, you're not going to believe this. Or they go, well, this sounds crazy. But, you know, they always kind of predate it with that sentence. And like right away, I'm hooked. I'm like, here we go. This is it. This is real. This happened.
Yeah, that's the tell. That's the tell. You know you're in for a story when someone starts with, well, you're going to think I'm crazy, but... Yeah,
it's great. They're my favorite. I love it.
That's when you pop the popcorn, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. I
want to hang on this UFOs thing for a minute.
Sure.
What's your take on what's inside these things? Do you think it's physical life from outside our solar system? Do you think it's something interdimensional? Do you think it's something totally opposite of both of those?
So I hear this debate a lot. I know like the new hot theory is to think that the UFOs themselves are drones and they're not actually piloted by a being. That's been big lately, especially with the UFO disclosure stuff. Well, I don't think it's any one thing, first of all. There's a neat video on YouTube that I like to refer people to, and it just explains exactly how small we are in the universe. It goes on to explain that we are, first of all, I'm in a city, in a state, in a country, on the planet Earth, in a solar system, in a galaxy, and then the galaxy is in a section of galaxies and so on and so forth. We are really, really, really not terribly important. And, I think that, when you start looking at other things visiting us from other planets, living in other sections of the universe, you're very naive if you don't believe that there's alien life, for one. And if you don't believe that the possibilities are truly infinite, you just don't understand it. You don't understand the scope. So I think that when these things visit, they're all different. I think that there's something different in the triangles. I think there's something different in the saucers. There's something different in the Tic Tacs. They're all different species, and why they're coming to visit, I don't know. I haven't talked to them and asked. Different ones have different motives. One of my big, which was the recent episode we put out, was the Tanya Derenberger. Close to the Derenbergers, close to the Injured Cold stuff. Injured had a different motive to come here. Kind of just because, kind of just boredom, kind of because he could. How they're getting here, well, I don't think that they're coming in any type of, I don't think they're just like we jump in a car and go down to, Walmart. I don't think they're doing that with their ships. I think that they would have to perfect time travel in order to get here because, light years are expansive, and I don't think anything will ever be able to travel that fast for it to make sense, but they are able to travel. And I think, they are visiting. It's just that they've perfected a science. So therefore, here's another thing. Again, what I do has a lot of physics and a lot of astrophysics. String theory is a big, big, big part of what I do because I buy into that concept of string theory and the different dimensions. These things travel, and they travel through space and time. So therefore, they are at minimum fourth dimensional. That's what the fourth dimension is being able to traverse. It's why and I personally believe, as humans, we cannot perfect time travel because we are third dimensional. And if we could, it would make us fourth dimensional. Now, can we evolve? Can dimensions evolve? I don't know. We're not there yet. So these things, whatever they are, I think probably have some type of at least fourth dimensional status to where they're able to get here. And then again, I think they're all coming with different motives. I think it could be anything as small as just, hey, I'm taking my alien family on a vacation, to anything big. Hey, we noticed that you have these big animals that you guys eat. Let's cut them open and figure out why that is. I think that it depends on the species.
So yeah, you mentioned space and time. You have to, when talking about time travel, take into account that our position in the universe is not the same as it was 25 years ago. So you can't just be like, oh, poof, I traveled backwards in time 25 years. Earth was not there. And a lot of people don't take into account the space aspect of time travel. So there's a lot of extra calculation there to be able to successfully time travel to get to where it is that that you're going. So that's something that I always like to bust out when people are talking Back to the Future or, whatever. The fun Hollywood version of time travel is easier to digest, but not in any way scientifically accurate.
No, I would like to believe. I mean, that's some of the fun of it is that like I have a personal opinion and a professional opinion. And like my personal opinion would like to believe that like we can time travel, but my professional opinion, it's probably never going to happen. Not before we, destroy ourselves. Again, could we evolve dimensionally? Maybe. We see evolution happens within our dimensional range, right? It happens on the third dimension. So maybe it happens across the board. Maybe that's why some people are more attuned to this stuff. Maybe that is a step in evolution that we're just not recognizing. I don't know. I don't think that's something I'll ever figure out in my lifetime. Not unless, of course, an intelligent species comes and shares the knowledge with us, and that hasn't happened yet. So we'll see.
Well, we'll change gears and get off of the UFO stuff.
Sure.
I like to talk about it, and it's hard to find people who have a strong scientific background who are also interested in the fun stuff of it, right? So I had to pick your brain a little bit.
That's okay.
I want to know a little bit about this documentary that you're working on because I am a huge Mothman fan. That big shiny metal ass that stands.
Oh yeah. Have you seen it in person?
Not
Have
in person yet. No.
Oh.
This is so terrible. So every year for the last decade, I have planned to go to the Mothman Festival. Because if you're going to go, there's stuff there then.
Sure.
Besides just the museum and the TNT area and all this stuff.
You're right. Yeah.
So every year that I have planned to go, which includes several years of purchasing hotel rooms, the whole 9 yards, something comes up and I'm not able to go. Oh, no. Whether it's like a karate tournament for my oldest son, or somebody ends up getting sick, or whatever the case. So then 2020 was going to be the year, hell or high water. And then everything was gone for 2 years. And I don't even know what day it is. And so now, we're looking forward optimistically, but I have no plans of ever going to West Virginia. That way I might have a shot. So
reverse psychology on the universe.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes. Yeah, but I'd like to know, like, what's the take on this documentary? What is it? What's the story that you're showing to the world? My
mom, when she found out I was working on this documentary, my very supportive mother was like, aren't there already documentaries about this thing? And she's right, there are. So, I could just do a quick retelling of the Point Pleasant flap, I guess, and all that. But, that's not what I'm doing with this thing. So, again, it's called Sinking the Mothman because I want to branch out and I want to kind of break this myth that the Mothman was strictly seen from 1966 to 1967, primarily around small town West Virginia. It wasn't. It never was. In the beginning of this, one thing that I was telling people is that I was kind of carrying the torch of John Keel because I'm a big fan of Keel stuff. But there's a lot that I don't necessarily agree with. And when he wrote the Mothman prophecies, he made it sound like the Mothman was involved with this bridge collapse, and that was kind of it. And there was nothing else to it. Case closed. That's not the case. Mothman's been seen everywhere. It's been seen all over the world. Predating, spoken language, it's been a legend that's been around forever. They just don't always call it the Mothman. The Mothman was just a story for this area that this happened in at this time. But it didn't go away. Even in West Virginia after the bridge collapse, there were still sightings that were happening after that point. Keel was just a good storyteller, and so he wanted to tie it all with a good bow and say that was it. But that just wasn't the case. You had I believe it's the Algonquin tribe had the flying head. The flying head, very similar description, human-like creature with glowing red eyes that flew around and they saw it throughout the tribe. And, then you have, of course, the Owlman is the most popular that's connected to the Mothman. The Owlman is over in the UK where, people saw this owl-like creature with glowing red eyes. People report seeing angels, and they report these kind of black, strange winged humanoids with these glowing eyes. The big tell of what these sightings all have in common is, again, especially in the case of angels, it's a very personal experience. And I think that the Mothman is not so much a harbinger of doom as it is a harbinger of growth. And when you have growth, you typically have, what we call in the spiritual world, the tower moment, right? Everything kind of crumbles, but then everything builds back in a much stronger, much larger tower. And you have that with these personal cases of the Mothman that people have. When you talk to the victims, and again, they start telling you their life and kind of what has happened with their life and how it's changed. They grow from it, and it's very impactful on them. Even though they might not even see it at the time, they might not draw that connection. Just say, I saw this weird thing, and then all of a sudden I lost my job. They're like, oh, that was negative. It's because I saw the Mothman. But then they went on to have a better job than they had before, or whatever it was that happened to them. I want to tell that story. I want to tell the real history of it. I want people to know that this was far, far more than just a year and a half of sightings in the middle of the United States.
So are you not just focusing on Point Pleasant? You're broadening the scope of the whole thing? Yeah,
we're kind of going everywhere. We'll be going out to Chicago to film the latest Mothman sightings around the O'Hare Airport and the Lake Michigan area. So we're definitely going to cover all of that as well, just because that seems to be the cool thing. I've had sightings, reports of sightings from Georgia, from Kentucky, Arizona. I've had them from all over, and I mostly focus on places that I can get to, but I will catalog those because I think that they're important. So I don't usually take sightings and stuff from across the pond. My team does dig into the history of what might be similar to this thing. And also other cases. At first, I'll tell you, it's been hard filming a documentary of an ongoing investigation because people keep asking, they're like, well, where is it? You've been working on this thing since 2019 now. I want to know where it's at. And, that's great, except it changes because the information changes. I mean, my first theory that I had a timeline, and I thought that there was maybe some tie between, actually, I thought it started with the Roswell crash in the 40s, going all the way up to the 70s. But I've scrapped that idea. I'm like, well, that doesn't really track as well, so it changes with the information. But I think I've found a pretty good stopping point finally. Eventually you got to put a lid on it and say, well, you guys are just going to have to wait for part 2. And I think that's where we're at with it. So
yeah. Have you done any documentary work before?
Never. I've never done anything. Actually, I got my first smartphone in 2019.
Okay.
I'm completely self-taught on everything. I've never been an artsy type of person. It's just that I felt like I needed to get this information out there. I felt like I was really onto something with the research and I needed a way to get it out there. So, that's been another thing. Purchasing equipment, having the funds to travel. I mean, it's not crowdfunded at all. This is all coming out of my pocket. And the only person I've had really that worked on it with me is I've had people come and go on the crew, but I've had only one consistent person stay. She's my historian, so she's not doing the editing or anything like that. So, it's been a slow process, but, it's been very fun learning how to do it. And I want to make more documentaries as I continue to go.
How long have you been working on it?
So like I said, it started in 2019. But at that point in time, I actually wasn't the director. It wasn't originally my project. It was somebody else's. They dropped out of the project. I decided that, well, it still needs to be seen. This still needs to be out there. The information needs to be shared. So it officially became mine back in the spring of 2020.
What would you say your percentage do you think that you are finished with it?
And as far as filming goes, we're basically done filming. The only thing that we need to do now is the last segment. But then, I've been doing the editing. I'd say probably about a good 75%.
The reason I'm asking all these questions so directly is because I also have never made a documentary, but am presently making a documentary 100% on my own.
Yeah.
And
it's hard.
I'm struggling. I'm struggling a lot. Who would have thought that making a movie would be so hard?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard, especially a documentary. One time we went and I thought I had a pretty good solid team going. And one of the things I do when someone new wants to get in on the documentary is I take them to Point Pleasant and I tour them around and kind of give them the story from there and just the feel. Because I know you mentioned you've never been to West Virginia. And if you're not from there, I don't know what it's like living there. But if you're not from there and you go to West Virginia, it's weird. I mean, just the entire vibe of it changes. And like, I've been in the Appalachians and other portions of the country, up in Pennsylvania and stuff, and it still doesn't feel like West Virginia does. And I don't know why it's so strange, but that's the first thing I do. Like, hey, if you're really going to be interested in this, then you have to know the research. You got to know the subject. Let's go. And I had one guy go with us and he was like, are we going to do any work or are we just sightseeing? And I was like, okay, obviously you're not cut, because we have fun with it too. I mean, we genuinely enjoy what we do, so we're going to have a good time. And the touristy trap stuff is very fun, Yeah. I mean, making something on your own like this, it's hard. It is very hard and it takes a long time. And people on the internet get very impatient with you because you keep talking about it and not producing. But,
yeah,
it's just one of those things. I mean, like I said, you got the learning curve, you have the money, you have the equipment upgrades, you have the skill. Sometimes you'll learn a new skill and you'll go back like an editing thing and you'll go back and look at what you've edited so far and you're like, well, that's shit. Let me start over, And so you just do it all over again. I mean, it's definitely a creative process, but you get better as you go. And even though I say we're about 75% done now, I mean, that could go back to 60, it could go jump up to 95 real quick and then jut down to 40. It just depends.
And it's all of what you said, but all of what you said just wears you down and kills the motivation aspect.
Yes. Yes, it can. I've stepped back from it. Actually, during the winter months is usually when I set Mothman down and I start doing other things. And it helps also that my job is an investigator. So like when my research takes me somewhere else for a minute, like it's kind of taken me on. I've been on Dogman for a minute now. It's taken me over there, and so I can kind of focus on that. That's kind of the breath of fresh air that you get. And then I feel like, okay, I can go back to Mothman now. I can get excited again about it. Because, as much as I'm passionate about it, Mothman was never even my favorite of all the spooky creatures out there. He just chose me. I don't know why.
I love it. Absolutely.
Because I touch his butt all the time in Point Pleasant. He must enjoy it.
Of course. Who wouldn't? No. So Dogman, where are you looking into Dogman sightings, just in general or somewhere specific?
Oh, Jesus. No. I'm looking at the land between the lakes. Which, is pretty popular. So we have Dogman locally, where I live, actually in Germantown, Ohio, which is probably about 15 minutes away from where I'm at. I had heard about the Dogman legend because, back again, when I was a cool kid and I ate special brownies and stuff, we used to drive around. We would joyride in like spooky places. There was this area we used to go to and we called it Fudge Road because there's all these legends associated with this one road. We'd also heard that there was a werewolf in that area. And we were like, oh, that's, again, that was too much for me. I'm like, werewolves aren't real. That's not real. And then I had met somebody doing this work that had a Dogman sighting in Arizona. We got really close and I believed his story. I'm like, well, that actually sounds legitimate. Let me look into this a little bit more. And most of the stories that you hear about Dogman are very supernatural rather than anything biologically terrestrial. But, last year, I think it was the beginning of last year, I started hearing about this land between the lakes stuff. And as the story goes, in the 1980s, there was a family that was massacred by a dogman or maybe dogmen. And the whole town just kind of kept it hush hush. It was a big conspiracy. There's no record of it. And I'm like, okay. And this guy came out and said that he was actually there. He's a witness. He's the only surviving witness to this Dogman attack. I didn't believe his story. It got me interested. So I started looking into it. But then when I started looking into the land between the lakes in general, there was other weird things about it that had caught my interest. The very first thing that had happened was I was talking to another researcher about it on the phone one night. I looked up the land between the lakes just to see how far it was from us, because we're in Ohio and it's not that, it's like 3 hours away. It's not far. When I looked it up on Google, I remember it was like 12:30 at night. And Google has like this little graph that tells you how busy a place is when you look at it, right? And so the time slot that you're in right at that moment is highlighted pink, and then all the rest of it is blue. So when I looked at it at 12:30 at night, Google had said that this place was super busy. I mean, it was popping at the LBL at 12:30 on a Wednesday or whatever it was. And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird, but Google, I'm sure they got glitches and stuff. So I didn't really think that much about it, but I did screenshot it. Then I was talking to my research partner about it. And again, she's my historian. She will find everything and anything I want about history. And so I'm telling her about it one night. We're hanging out. We're just having some beers. That's how we research. We have beers and talk about weird stuff. She's like, well, how far is it again? And I was like, oh, well, let me pull it up on the map. So I pull it up on Google Maps. Same thing, same exact thing. And it's 12:30 at night. And it's telling me that this place is just booming with people. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Let's keep looking at this. And we're testing it. We're Googling it and we're looking at it different times a day, 3:00, 9 a.m., different times a day. And it's not quite happening. So she starts researching how Google gets those numbers. And it turns out Google gets those numbers by the cell phone towers and where they're pinging from at that location, at that point in time. So something is happening there at the LBL between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. every single night, which is interesting. Is that a huge smoking gun? No, it's not. Could it mean nothing? Sure, it absolutely could, but it didn't feel that way. So I started digging into it, and with the LBL massacre, I still haven't found anything that solidifies that this ever happened. I don't think it did. I've tried to reach out to Jan Thompson, who wrote about it originally. She says 2 cops walked into the gas station she worked at and told her this story. They just left the scene of the crime and told her about it, which I thought was weird because it's a big government cover up. Why would they tell some teenage girl working at a gas station? But who knows?
The worst person you could tell is a teenage girl.
Right. I mean, why would they? It just didn't make sense. There's no record of any missing family. There's just absolutely no footprint that says that this happened. Except I have 2 really good friends. They run a YouTube called Hellbit Holler. It's Jesse and Joe, and they've been out there. And they have seemed to find the location, what we believe is the location of where this attack might have taken place. They said that the witness that said he was there described that location perfectly, which I never believed his story. But I believed them. And then they also caught, you can watch it in their first Land Between the Lakes video on YouTube. They got some really interesting heat cam footage of some creature out there. It's very confusing to me because I don't know what to believe anymore about it. But Dogman doesn't make sense to me physically, biologically. Doesn't make sense why a dog would evolve to be bipedal. We're not faster. We're slower because we walk on two legs. It doesn't make sense. But if this is something that is supernatural or interdimensional or who knows, then that does make sense. It does. So I don't know. That's it, I guess.
As soon as you said Dogman, I immediately thought of Land Between the Lakes.
Yeah.
And I love when this happens. Okay, you're not going to hurt my feelings. How much of my show are you familiar with?
Oh, gosh, none.
Okay, no, totally cool. That's perfect. Okay, so you have...
I know them feels too.
You have no idea about the documentary that I'm working on, correct?
I don't. No, I do not.
Perfect. Check this out. I love when this happens. I had no idea you were looking into Dogman. None. Especially Dogman at Land Between the Lakes. There's sightings everywhere, like you mentioned.
Sure.
21 minutes north of Land Between the Lakes is the focus of my documentary, which is about a lucid dream experience I had when I was 16 or so. And then 2 years later, me and my buddies come across this town. And I see the same house I had a lucid dream about. I see all these dead gar on the riverbank, just like I had a dream about. Sends me down this weird rabbit hole. Takes place 21 minutes north of Land Between the Lakes. Start digging into this town, only to find several very curious things, including the Goat Man of Livingston County, Kentucky.
Yeah.
Which is in the Inhumanoids book, right?
Yeah.
Also, Aleister Crowley's got family that's buried in Livingston County, Kentucky.
Yeah,
which would be maybe 40 minutes north of Land Between the Lakes till they get to that cemetery. It's just so bizarre, this whole little section of Western Kentucky.
I believe the Hopkinsville's only about 40 miles.
Yeah. And Hopkinsville's right there too.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. What else? What else is at Hopkinsville? South of Hopkinsville is the Air Force Base, right? So
yeah. Yep.
So crazy, right?
I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's always, it doesn't surprise me, but it still makes me very excited. If that's makes
perfect.
Sense.
Yes, that's a perfect explanation. Yeah. Nothing surprises me at this point with this stuff. But man, I get hyped up every once in a while.
Yeah, you do. And that's how it goes. Sometimes it's something so simple too. And you're like, and like I said, does it seem significant to anybody else? No, it doesn't. But Helltown, Ohio has been one of those things for us too. Helltown is a little town that was abandoned back in the 70s. It wasn't abandoned. The government bought it out, made everybody move. We haven't been yet. I mean, it's about 2.5 hours away from us, but it also sits on Cuyahoga Nature Reserve. And that is also where we have an accumulative now about 250 Bigfoot sightings in that area, right? So again, Helltown's this weird abandoned town. When I first started working on this documentary, and I had no social media footprint. And like I said, I had just gotten a smartphone. I didn't know what I was doing. I just put out a post on Facebook. I was like, hey, has anybody seen the Mothman? And one of my old coworkers, I worked at a movie theater for like 5 years, and she gets a hold of me. She's like, yeah, I have. My mom has too. Come talk to us. And I was like, whoa. So I go and I hear their stories. And they had really cool stories. The mom saw it twice. And one time it was inside of their garage. So that was cool. But that's not the coolest part. The mom goes, have you heard of Helltown? And I'm like, well, yeah, I've heard of it. What about it? She was like, listen, I've got this guy. I'm going to invite him over. I'm going to invite you over. We're all going to have a barbecue and we're just going to hang out. And I'm going to have you tell us, he's going to tell you a story. And I'm like, okay. And I had never, that was the first eyewitness I'd ever interviewed anyway, was my coworker and her mom. So I go to this barbecue and we all hang out and it's very normal. And then afterwards, we're all just kind of sitting in the living room and the mom, she comes in from the kitchen, she sits down, lets out a big old sigh, looks at this man. I didn't know who he was. And she goes, tell her the story. And you could see his entire demeanor completely shift. But he said, what are you talking about? And she just gave him this look and she's like, you know what I'm talking about. And he's like, okay. And he goes on to tell me that in the 1970s, he was a park ranger for the Cuyahoga Nature Reserve. And at the time, what they wanted them to do mostly was kind of scout out the Helltown area because they had just taken it over and they were concerned that angry residents would come, catch it on fire, vandalize, things like that, because they were pissed about losing their home. So he was doing that, and he had just kind of walked out of the Helltown range and into the woods there, into the actual reserve. He said out of nowhere, he'd been doing this every night for months, and it was nighttime. He comes upon a giant fence, and he said it looked chain link. He said it didn't look like anything special. He said, but it was probably, it was a good 7-foot tall fence. He said, and he'd never seen it before. Didn't know anything about a fence being built there. He starts walking around it. And as he's like kind of walking around it, he can start kind of seeing like in between the trees a little bit. And he starts kind of hearing commotion going on within the fence. And he's like trying to find the entrance. But then he came upon a clearing where he could see kind of straight through. And he said that what he saw, he said, ma'am, I don't know what to tell you what it was. All I can say is that there were 5 military men standing around in a circle around this creature. And it looked like the thing from Jeepers Creepers. And I don't know what was happening. It looked like it was attacking the men, but it wasn't moving. It wasn't doing anything. He said, I think it was some type of electrical attack. I don't know. Because he's just some real old guy, some old hick guy in Ohio. And he said he left and he never went back to his job ever again after that. And that scared the shit out of me. I mean, that genuinely scared me. It was, again, this was the third witness now I'd ever interviewed. I'd never heard anything like it. And so I was very scared. And the person that I was working on the documentary with at the time, I called them and I was like, I don't think we should do this anymore, because it's either you believe in this stuff or you don't. And at that point in time, I was like, well, is the government involved, or do they know? Are they going to come after me? I got a child to think about. I got friends. I want to live. And so I went to my best friend's house and I talked to her a little bit about it. And I mean, I'm like, we can't bring our phones. We need to like go out into the middle of your yard. I was so scared. And she's like, well, she said, but if you think this is happening, don't you think people should know about it? And after I mulled it over, I decided to then continue. Now I've told that story multiple times now and I'm still alive. So, who knows? It could have been completely nothing, but Helltown kept popping up and it still has, every little bit. Someone will just randomly bring it up. And now, granted, we live in Ohio and people know about it. It's never like that. It's always when it's me and my research partner together doing something completely unrelated and someone random will come along and mention Helltown. And every time we get that chill, we're like, God, there it is. We need to go. We haven't been yet, but it's definitely happening. So I don't know. Another interesting story for you.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's awesome. Because I totally relate to that, because there's been a few guests that have come on where we'll have no plan whatsoever, kind of like how we have absolutely no plan whatsoever. I like it that way. I like the spontaneity of it, like the whole basis of Paranormal Patios. We're in this like metaphysical patio, and it's whatever you're listening right now. It's whatever you want it to be, for the guests. It's whatever they want to be. It's whatever I want it to be. We're just two people hanging out and we're sharing stories and, and having a good time. That's the goal. But anyway, so I'll have someone come on and they will say something totally, seemingly random, and it will be something about like Western Kentucky. And I'll be like, oh, hold on a minute now. Like before we go on the air, like Kiki Dombrowski was the first one. We had like an hour-long conversation before we even started recording for the show because she said the word Paducah. And I was like, well, what do you know about Paducah? And then there we were off to the races. And so, I love it. I love when that happens. And when you said Dogman, I was like, oh, I hope she says Lane Between the Legs. And here we are. And I love it. And that's fascinating. So, okay. We've been going here for quite a while, and I'm sure people are probably getting restless, and I'm going to let them leave the patio. You're no longer under citizen's arrest. Before you head off, though, Ashers, if you would do the fun end of the podcast guest interview spot thing where you talk about yourself and where people can find you online, that everybody loves to do, that would be awesome.
Oh, I love talking about myself. You can find me all over social media. You can find me on Facebook under Ashley Hilt. I'm the one with the red hair. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at It's Ashers with a Z. Also, my show on Wednesdays, We Talk Weird. It is literally everywhere you get podcasts. Doesn't matter where you listen to it at. It's out there. It's the only thing that pops up when you Google it. But you're best to definitely follow me on any type of social media. I post all my updates about what I'm doing, new show updates, things like that. So there you go. That's it. That's my plug.
Good job. Thanks for coming on the show. Really good conversation. Had a lot of fun. And, I'm sure somewhere down the line, we'll meet up again in some fashion. Maybe we need to organize like a big Dogman hunt in Land Between the Lakes.
Yes, I'm totally down.
Get Tobias Whalen down here.
Oh my God, that's my best friend. He's not my best friend, but he is my best friend.
Tobias is great. And I think he'd be down for it. Oh, there's several people we could get, and we could just go to Land Between the Lakes.
Oh, yeah. I think we should do it.
That would be amazing. Awesome.
Until next time, keep the fire going.